shootings in recent weeks, the calls for action remain loud, but whatever the solutions may be will forever be tied up in the political divide in our country. So what should happen, what will happen, what might happen? Let's talk about it with our friend, Democratic strategist Isaac Wright, who's back up late with me on the Final Five. Isaac, good to see you again.
Good to be with you, my friend. How are you?
We're good. So anytime we see something come down the line, when we report about these mass shootings, which regardless of where you stand, these are tragedies. These should not happen. These are people living their lives. However, there are predictable responses. Democrats say we need gun control now. Republicans will say there's a Second Amendment in this country for a reason. Is there some sort of common ground that we're missing here? I mean, what is this idea of common sense gun legislation that we always hear about but never see any action on?
Well, I think you nailed it right there. We need to move beyond the partisan sides to this. And let's all first agree on a common goal. We want to see a reduction of gun violence in this country, whether it is community violence, mass shootings, domestic violence, suicide by gun. We want to see a reduction in gun violence in this country. If we can get everybody in Washington to be on that principle, then we can have debates about what's the best way to get there. And I think that's where we need to go. We talk about common sense gun reforms. Look, I'm a hunter and a gun owner myself. We have a law in this country that if you're out for waterfowl, you have a 2-round capacity in your magazine, and that's it. But yet we sell weapons that are intended for the infliction of mass destruction and mass casualties with capacities up to 50 rounds. We've got to address where is the common sense middle ground there that we can reach. And, we've seen some leadership out of the Biden administration recently, 6 big steps that the administration was able to take to do things like curtail ghost guns, which are just a terrible tragedy. Those are not things that are meant for the deer stand or the duck blind, right?
They don't have the serial numbers, right?
Correct. So, untraceable guns that you assemble yourself with no serial number.
I've had a lot of people on this show who are Republicans. They're proud gun owners as well. And the second that came out, it was out of my cold dead hands. They're quoting Charlton Heston. But I think there's a bigger picture which we bring up on the show, and people brought this up. Do you think that on the Democratic side there is that maybe there's also not a full knowledge of these regulations? You're a gun owner, but do you think everybody knows the various? Is there a lack of education when it comes to that on the Democratic side?
I think Democrats better job of understanding the application of firearms for hunting. Right. I think a greater understanding of that and the language would be very helpful to having a constructive conversation about this issue. Right. Nobody is looking to take away the firearms from law-abiding, responsible hunters. Right. We need to understand that. We need to understand the difference between magazine capacity for a gun, where a 3rd round for that pheasant makes a big difference versus the magazine capacity on a .223. We need to be able to have those conversations and have them intelligently. And I think that's something that Democrats are working to do better, but it is something we need to be conscious of.
And we know after school shootings, after other mass shootings, we've heard from Republicans saying, it's not a gun issue, it's a mental health issue. And maybe when it comes to the gun laws that are out there, why are we worried about passing new ones when we should be enforcing the ones on the books? And again, it seems like there's a playbook here where people default to the same talking points. I think back to Sandy Hook. I was there. And you had, in the aftermath of that, Joe Manchin and Pat Toomey, Democrat and Republican, come together for a background check bill. Nothing happened because that died a very quick death. And if you can't agree on something like background checks, where do you find any common ground on anything else?
Yeah, well, can we just do common sense background checks for firearms sold at gun shows, right? Should we be willing to keep guns out of the hands of criminals, out of the mentally disturbed from gun show sales? Absolutely. That's a common sense thing that I think the American people are behind. We just have to get politicians, especially those who have been overly influenced by the corporate lobbyists for the gun manufacturing industry. We have to get them to listen to the American people and make some of those common sense reforms. But you hit on a really key point there about the mental health crisis in America. And I don't want to dismiss that. That should not be lost to any partisan back and forth. There's a serious mental health crisis going on right now in this country. Even before COVID, the prevalence of mental illness among adults in America and youth alike, it was already on the rise, and that's been increased by the COVID pandemic and what's going on. And there's still unmet needs. 60% of youth in this country suffering major depression don't have access to mental health care. 1 in 4 adults with a mental health issue in this country don't have insurance or coverage to be able to get help and support. That is a crisis we have to address, just like we have to address the gun violence crisis in America.
What?
And we can't let politicians pit one against the other. We have to address both.
One of the things I've appreciated about doing this show is that I deliberately try to avoid the extremes. I want to have reasonable people on this show. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on tonight is because you come to us with that this is not a left or right issue. That you're literally the embodiment of somebody who's sort of in the center of this and realizing that you can own a gun and you can be pro Second Amendment and you can be a Democrat and vice versa on that. Isaac Wright, I got to go. Good to see you again, my friend. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Good to see you, my friend. Common sense reform. We can do it together.